Do you remember last Christmas? Seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? How about who played in the Super Bowl in February? Well, yep, the Super Bowl was played between the 49ers and the Chiefs, and if you didn't know it, the Chiefs won. But really, when you think about that, the Super Bowl seems like it was about a year ago. It's a blur. And I mentioned Christmas and the Super Bowl, two big events, in the life of our nation. In particular, because a little more than 1 month after the Super Bowl, the whole world shifted. Since March, it's as if we are all held captive in a season of suffering and uncertainty. Coronavirus has affected every one of us one way or another. And today, 4.5 months later, we still ache to enter the promised land. But if there's anything we know about life, we know life is about uncertainty and suffering. We all live lives filled with hard seasons. So what do we do about that? Well, if you're a follower of Jesus, we go where he leads us. With Jesus, we can face every hard season, learning what it means to trust in him. The love of Jesus glues us together with him and glues us together with each other. And we can thrive even during this hard season. 2 weeks ago, I told the story of Joseph and how he continued to live in the promises of God to his great-grandfather Abraham, his grandfather Isaac, and his father Jacob. The people of God are blessed, and God said, "You will be blessed in order that you be a blessing for all the people of the world." And when we were last with Joseph in Egypt a couple of weeks ago, we remember that he rules for King Pharaoh. The Israelites are all saved. God's promise is still in place. They're saved from a famine. And by joining Joseph in Egypt, the 12 tribes of Israel, as it were secure. Because God worked through Joseph, actually, the Israelites and the Egyptians were saved. Then Jacob, father of Joseph, dies, and all of his 12 sons and all of the officials of the royal court of Egypt go to Israel. They travel there with Joseph, this whole entourage, and they go to Shechem in Israel, where they bury Jacob, where his father and mother and their ancestors were buried. Then Joseph and his 11 brothers, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, return to Egypt. Joseph continues to rule to a ripe old age, we're told. And before he dies, Joseph speaks of the future. He gives a prophecy for God's people. Joseph says this from Genesis 50. "So I will die," Joseph told his brothers, "but God will surely come to help you and lead you out of this land of Egypt. He will bring you back to the land he solemnly promised to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." But why would they want to go back? The Israelites are thriving at this time in Egypt. Well, here's why. Exodus chapter 1. In time, Joseph and all his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so great that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. So eventually a new king came into power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. This new king said to his people, "Look, The people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country." So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. The hard season has come. God's promises look bleak. As the old King James version of the Bible records, and these are the words that I remember most, that they're kind of etched in my mind. "Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph." So the Israelites become slaves, and slaves they will remain, unless God comes and rescues them. But they don't hear from God. And they are so overwhelmed by slavery, they cry out, but in a muted voice, almost without words. You see, even as slaves, the Israelites do continue to multiply. And so it appears God is blessing them at the same time they remain under the chains of slavery. And finally, the Pharaoh says, "Enough!" And he declares a genocide. Yep. He says, "Throw all the baby boys of the Israelites into the Nile River to drown them." It sounds like King Herod during the time of the birth of Jesus, doesn't it? Well, one baby boy who was born is saved. He's rescued. He is put in a little covered boat, kind of like a mini Ark of Noah. And he's rescued by his sister, and then by Pharaoh's daughter, who is bathing in the river. You see, Miriam, Moses' sister, is also a slave for Pharaoh's daughter. And Pharaoh's daughter says, "Fetch that baby." And Miriam brings her brother to Pharaoh's daughter, and Pharaoh's daughter decides, "I'm going to raise this baby as my own." But first, she realizes the baby needs to be nursed. And so she asks Miriam offers quickly that she will find a wet nurse who will breastfeed the baby and raise him in his early age. And so, sure enough, she suggests Moses' own mother as the one who will nurse him and raise him for a couple of years. And Pharaoh's daughter agrees. And finally, the baby is returned to Pharaoh's daughter, who then adopts him and names him Moses, Moishe, in the Hebrew, which means lifted out, as if lifted out of the water, lifted out of that hard season. For 40 years, Moses grows up in the courts of the Pharaoh. Once again, God somehow makes it possible for his people to continue to thrive in the midst of the hard season again. In the midst of their slavery, Moses, whom God will know very soon to us in the story, God is protecting his people through the royalty in Egypt. At least he is protecting his people through this one man. Moses lives a confused life, however. He knows he is a Hebrew, raised by his Hebrew mother, but he's also an Egyptian prince. And then everything changes. We continue. Many years later, when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his own people, the Hebrews, and he saw how hard they were forced to work. During his visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. After looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. The next day, when Moses went out to visit his people again, he saw 2 Hebrew men fighting. "Why are you beating up your friend?" Moses asked. He'd said this to the one who had started the fight. And then that guy replies, "Who appointed you to be our prince and judge? Are you going to kill me as you killed that Egyptian yesterday?" Then Moses was afraid, thinking, "Everyone knows what I did." And sure enough, Pharaoh heard what had happened, and he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in the land of Midian. So Moses escapes from Egypt, and the land of Midian is all the way over to Saudi Arabia in present day. Moses arrives at Midian, and he comes to a well, and there's a shepherd, a woman, who is watering her sheep, and other shepherds attack her and try to kill her and steal her sheep. But Moses steps in, and he saves the life of the shepherd who is being attacked. And she brings him to her father. Her name is Zipporah, and her father's name is Jethro, and he is a priest of Midian. In other words, Jethro is the priest of pagan gods. Moses and Zipporah are married, and they have children. And Moses continues the life of a shepherd for 40 more years. And then this happens. One day, Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. He stared into the fire. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. "This is amazing," Moses said to himself. "Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it." It's interesting that human beings have been staring into the flames of fire since we have been human beings. We know this because our ancestors, the ones who survived, the ones who are our descendants, as it were, we're their descendants, our ancestors, they needed that fire to protect them from the vicious wild animals. They needed that fire to warm them at night, and they needed that fire to cook their food. And they survived, and they thrived. And staring into one kind of fire or another is something we have been doing out of necessity up to just recently in human history. But we still stare into fires. There's something about a fire. You know, your campfire, fires at the beach, when you get to go to the beach again and have fires. But staring into the flames of a fire, this is where we contemplate. This is where we are settled. It's like looking into a mirror of our very soul. And sure enough, for Moses, this burning bush transforms his life again. Think about it this way. Desert bushes have deep roots, a deep root system. Of course, in order to survive where there's scarce groundwater, they have to go down and down and down. Well, Moses has a deep root system. He is 80 years old now, and he still doesn't know who he is. Is he an Egyptian? Is he a Hebrew? Is he a Midianite? Even his early years are a cloud to him. Israelite mother nurses him for his first 2-3 years, and then the Egyptian mother oversees his growing years, but Moses still connects to his Hebrew ancestry. He has deep roots. And something else we know about bushes in the desert, they have thorns. lots of thorns, just like the thorns in Moses' life. He murders an Egyptian out of a sense of protecting a Hebrew brother. But the Hebrews don't want anything to do with Moses, and so he escapes to a foreign land with foreign gods. He goes from being a prince of Egypt to a lowly shepherd. It's about as big of a case of downward mobility as you could ever imagine. That's a lot of thorns. And Moses continues to stare into the fire. Then he comes closer. Moses speaks. "Here I am!" In the midst of the confusion of his identity, his roots, out of the thorns of hardship of his last 80 years of his life, in one way or another, God is there. Moses is there with God. Now what? "Do not come any closer," the Lord warned. "Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. God speaks, and Moses knows he's on holy ground. God is giving Moses his identity. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." Then God gives Moses a new calling in this, a new season. Then the Lord told him, "I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of the harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites now live. Look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now, go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people out of Israel." 80 years old, and it's time to move. What is it that God is calling Moses to do? Fulfill his destiny. See, Moses is a rescuer. He's been a rescuer all his life. It's how he's wired. Through the burning bush, through the thorny branches, Moses sees his destiny. All his life, Moses has rescued those who are treated unfairly. He rises up. It's as if he can't avoid being a rescuer. Whether it's an Egyptian slave master or Midianite shepherds, Moses is going to save the innocent. Moses is given a mirror of who God has called him to be. He will be the ultimate rescuer of God's people. But Moses doesn't trust himself. He doesn't trust his new calling. We read, Moses protested to God, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" Moses cries out, "Who am I?" After all these 40-year segments of his life, adding up to 80. Who is he? Well, God answers, "I will be with you." That's all he needs to know. Who is he? He's God's son. You are God's sons, God's daughters. And you can hear these same words from God spoken to you during your hard season right now. I will be with you. So whether you're 80 or you're 40 or you're 14, it doesn't matter. During this time of plague, you're standing before God, facing an unknown future along with the rest of us. Yes, life is uncertainty. We know that for sure now, don't we? Life is full of suffering. People have lost their lives. People have lost their businesses, their jobs. People have had their whole lives turned upside down and are seeking and searching for answers. What is happening? In fact, we can almost hear that cry, who am I? What do I do? But like Moses, when you face the thorns of your life, you face the thorns of your own doing, or the thorns of things that have done to you, or the things that are happening around you, God is calling you out of your burning bush. He is calling you by name. He has to let Moses know he knows who he is by saying his name twice. God is calling you by name. You can hear him say your name twice. Who am I? God tells you who you are. This is your burning bush moment. You see, we haven't faced anything like this. And what we have faced during these last several months, there's no blueprint. There's nothing to go by in man's ways. What is God saying to you today from your burning bush? Well, for Moses, he's a rescuer. What is it about you that makes you click? What is it about you that you have a sense of being compelled to do something that brings good into the world? What is your burning bush telling you? You see, God wants to accomplish your destiny, and he says he will work through you, and he promises to be with you. But we're not all called to be Moses. We're not called to follow specifically his life. Who are you? No matter what it's like Moses, you are working for God. Maybe this is a time that God is calling you to consider a new start in your life, a time of rebooting your life in some sort of way. Or maybe it's as simple as re-examining who you are in your present life, whether it's your family, whether it's your job, or your studies if you're a student. Who are you? Who is God calling you to be to fulfill your destiny? See, like Moses, every single one of us works for God. God is our master. God is the one who is in charge. And God promises to guide you. He promises to be with you. But you work with God to discover what is your destiny. And as you think about this, one thing is we've got a lot of time to think about things, don't we? As you think about this, you realize that God is there all along the way, and he's the one that you're answering to, no one else. I like how Dallas Willard responds to a question of what is your calling or what is your vocation? So watch this brief video clip.
That is a part of what develops for someone like Brother Lawrence or Jeremy Taylor or others who talk about the practice of the presence of God. They think all life is spiritual. So we don't need to make a special place for spirituality. Now, on the path there, perhaps we need to make a distinction to help us direct ourselves toward the things that will be best for us. But the outcome of that would be the realization that whatever you do in word or deed, and then the rest of Colossians 3 goes ahead and picks up on our work and tells us that whatever we do, the Lord is our paymaster. We receive our reward from God. I don't work for anyone but Christ. Now, because I work for Christ, I'll do a much better job for the people who think I'm working for them. And so I take that responsibility seriously, but I'm not working for them. I'm working for Christ.
I'm working for Christ. I'm not working for my family. I'm not working for this congregation community. I'm not working for the government. I'm not working for anyone else but Jesus alone. And because I see myself as working for Jesus, just like you are working for Jesus in all the roles of your life, whether it be job or family or school, you are God's son, God's daughter. And He has unbelievable opportunities for you that are just waiting as you realize, who am I? I am one whom Jesus is calling to bring good into the world. So what are you wired to do to bring good into the world? That's a great question. And it doesn't mean that you have to follow Moses, you know? I mean, Moses is the greatest example of a human being that we have in the Hebrew Scripture in the Old Testament. Moses is a friend of God and had relationship face to face, as it were. But even Moses is not meant to be our specific model. Rabbi Zuzia, from an old Jewish story, when he was asked as an old man, in the world to come, or he told an old man, in the world to come, they will not ask me, why were you not more like Moses? Rather, they will ask me, why were you not more like Zuzia? You see, your destiny is your own. God has created you uniquely, and that mold is broken now. You are His son, His daughter, and He specifically has you in mind for work that brings joy and brings blessing and goodness to the world, beginning in your home and moving out from there. So what is God the Father saying to you from the burning bush? Think on these things. Amen.